this species of Variformin's been extinct since the Cretaceous period. I mean, this thing isn't on this thing. What?
It's a dinosaur.
You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
You just tear up the rule book on it. Cold-bloodedness, it doesn't apply. They're totally wrong. This is a warm-bodied creature.
This thing doesn't live in a swamp.
This thing's got, what, a 25, 27-foot neck?
Brachiosaurus 30.
We've all seen the scene from Jurassic Park, where the Brachiosaurus leans up on its hind legs to go eat the top of the tree. One of the most famous scenes from the movie and the most iconic. But how realistic is this? Ever since that movie, many different depictions of sauropods have been shown doing this. Was it truly all sauropods, or was it only a select few? Today on Paleo Mythbusters, I'll be tackling and seeing if sauropods could rear up on their hind legs. Sorry about that. In 1911, Henry Fairfield Osborn, a not very nice person in the world of paleontology, had a theory that sauropods might have been able to go on their hind legs and reach for the top of trees by using their tails as a support and going into a semi-tripod position. This was very radical during its time. And later, Henry Osborn would have Charles R. Knight, a very famous paleo artist of the time, create this image of a diplodocus going on its hind legs out of the water. Now we have to keep in mind that during the early 1900s, dinosaurs didn't have the best reputation. They were viewed as slow, dumb, and sauropods specifically having to live in the water. So to show a diplodocus on land and going on its hind legs went completely against the grain. Now, the theory during the time wasn't taken as seriously, but later we would see that there might have actually been some grounds for this thing. To do this, we're going to need to go to 1991, where this mount of a Barosaurus protecting its baby from a hungry Allosaurus was created. Now, during the time of its mounting, heavy debates were still going on in the paleontological community on whether or not Barosaurus was actually able to go on its hind legs. Now, we're going to get back to that discussion later, but for now, this exhibit would go on to inspire plenty of different films and documentaries, like Prehistoric Park, Dinosaurs Roamed America, and especially Jurassic Park, with the scene of the Brachiosaurus. Going back to what I said in the museum, during the time of construction, many different paleontologists were arguing about whether it was an accurate depiction of diplodocids and sauropods in general, or if this was just something that was made up because it looks cool. During the time, a majority of paleontologists agreed that most likely sauropods would not have been able to do this. A study done in 2005 by Rothschild and Molnar later would go on to say that if sauropods were to have been able to do these actions, then we would see it in the bones. There would be stress marks in their forelimbs which show crashing into the ground. However, there is no evidence anywhere in the fossil record of sauropods having these stress marks. So, this means that sauropods couldn't have done this, right? If we're going to look for evidence to see if sauropods could have gotten their hind legs, we're going to do a bit of time travel all the way back to the late Triassic period, where we see early sauropodomorphs starting to evolve. Now, for those who don't know what a sauropodomorph is a dinosaur which are closely related to the true sauropods, but there are too many differing features on the animals where we can't consider them true sauropods. So we call them sauropodomorph, which essentially means like somewhat sauropod or sauropod-like. It's basically just a way to categorize early animals which are closely related to true sauropods. Anyways, we see early sauropodomorphs like Plesiosaurus and Massospondylus having evolved to be bipedal because the first dinosaurs were bipedal animals. All that happened was that these early sauropodomorphs began to get larger. And as they got larger into the early Jurassic period, we see that they have started to have to rely more on their forelimbs and having to go on all four stance. But they could still switch from a bipedal to quadrupedal stance. Now, obviously, we know that later on, true sauropods would go on to be full-on quadrupeds. But we see that there is early evidence that sauropodomorphs were able to switch from a bipedal to quadrupedal stance and a quadrupedal bipedal stance, depending on the species. But there are arguments that can be made against this. Objection! Okay, so your apparent argument is that because the early species of sauropodomorphs were able to switch from a bipedal to a quadrupedal stance, that must mean that a later species of sauropod could have done this as well? That doesn't make any sense. They are much more derived. They are larger, like you said. Sauropods got larger over time. That would most likely mean that they would have lost that. If you're going to argue that, then you're going to need some actual evidence to support that in the fossil record. Okay, yes, there's no direct fossil evidence for sauropods being able to go on their hind legs. But that's not a valid argument. There's not a lot of direct fossil evidence for a lot of things. So to say that because there's no direct fossil evidence for this one thing would mean that we need to go back on a lot of our theories and say that none of them are true because there's no direct fossil evidence. Yeah, sure, there's no direct fossil evidence for a lot of things. I'll give you that. But you're still gonna need to show me some actual evidence before you go and make a claim that a 10-ton animal can go on its hind legs. I am so glad that he said that. A study done in 2009 by Heinrich Mallison looked at all previous evidence for sauropods being able to go on their hind legs. He found that early evidence, such as Titanosaurus's massively wide hips, is not actual evidence for sauropods being able to go on their hind legs. Plenty of animals in the modern day have wide hips, but can't go on their hind legs. But he did leave us a way to figure out if sauropods go on their hind legs. By looking at the center of gravity of different animals, he found that elephants usually have their center of gravity around their hip area. This is what allows them to go on their hind legs. So if sauropods had their center of gravity focused on their hips, then that would be our smoking gun. Now let's apply what we learned from Heinrich Mallison and use it in the real world. Species like Patagotitan over here and other titanosaurs would not have been able to go on their hind legs due to the fact of just how heavy they are. Patagotitan specifically could reach up to masses of around 80 tons on average. The gravity would not have allowed them to go on their hind legs. Species like Europasaurus and its more famous cousin, Brachiosaurus, are part of a larger group known as macronarians. Macronarians are known for one thing, having their center of gravity focused on their shoulder limbs right here. Now, this goes against what we know that elephants have, which their center of gravity being in their back limbs. Because macronarians are so front heavy, this would not have allowed them to go on their hind legs. So we're 2 for 3 right now. Titanosaurs and macronarians cannot have gone on their hind limbs. So what about the group that started it all? The Diplodocids. Well, if we focus in on the hip right there, Diplodocids actually were able to go on their hind legs. Like elephants, sauropods, like Apatosaurus here, their center of gravity is focused on their hip region, which would have biomechanically allowed them to go on their hind legs. So, at least for Diplodocids, this myth is a fact. And that's a wrap on the first video. It's crazy how even though our ideas of paleontology changed throughout the years, we still go back to some of these old theories, like sauropods being able to go up on their hips, That's it for today, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.